All right, well, welcome everyone to DirectConnect. Today we're going to talk about exercises and specifically GridEx. And to talk about that, we got a special guest. We got Jesse from the E-ISAC. Jesse, you want to tell us a little about yourself?
Sure. I'm Jesse Sythe. I'm the GridEx Program Manager at NERC E-ISAC. A little bit of my background, I've kind of lived all over the place. Grew up in Alaska, went to Colorado State University, and then promptly joined the Navy for 8 years. Spent some time operating reactors out in the middle of the ocean on the USS John C. Stennis out of Bremerton, Washington. I was at a training command near Saratoga Springs, New York. And then after my 8 years were done, I went and joined Eversource as a transmission operator. Spent 11 years over there in Connecticut. Really enjoyed doing that. I was I transitioned from transmission operations to simulation coordinator. I coordinated GridEx's 2 through 6 for Eversource, and then got my dream job of running the whole GridEx program here for E-ISAC. And I've been doing that since August of last year.
Yeah, similar background. I started in the military and then into Homeland Security. I think my first day as a DHS Fed after doing the military support to it was the makeup for National Level Exercise 11, where the electric and communication industries broke the FEMA exercise program. So that was a lot of fun.
Nice.
Welcome to the federal world. And then been kind of audited it for a bit and then back into the end user side. Played through one GridEx when I was at Grant PUD, and then now help people get ready for it. Kind of jumping right in, what are some of the best practices you've seen with exercises or the coolest scenarios you've seen?
I think some examples of, my favorite scenarios that I've ran, at least on my transmission operators, I know one that I love to do is the remote access of an operator's console. The way I've always run it in the past is I will sneak USB remote mouse or something like that into their computer before the exercise has begun. I'll sit back there in my instructor booth waiting to turn on the mouse, and then at some point throughout the exercise, they'll see their mouse start moving around, start opening breakers, things like that, and the look on their faces is always priceless. But beyond that and the fun of that, I like to do scenarios that kind of combine multiple vectors of attack and bring new questions and problems to operators, because one of the last ones I did over at Eversource was a combined cyber and physical attack that specifically focused on disabling relay protection schemes in an area and then forcing a fault via a physical attack. And this forced kind of a massive overtrip. It was very similar to the Florida blackout in 2008 that kind of inspired that inject. So I like stuff like that gets people thinking and kind of forces you to respond in a way that's not just standard, oh, we had a disturbance.
Yeah, I always love a good red herring. You get everybody thinking they're going left, and all of a sudden you hit them on the right. I always like to layer in social engineering because you just see it so often and it's so easy. I think my favorite one was probably when I was doing down in Florida, where there was a contractor who'd been a former employee, but because there was the miscommunication between the HR side and the procurement side, they didn't realize that somebody who'd been walked out the door was back in and doing network contracting for the company. So again, pulled right from the headlines, because I don't know how many times we've seen that, especially when you get into some of the plants. There's so many different contractors around there that we ran into that a lot when I was at Grant, that so-and-so is no longer allowed to work here. And then they'd put in a request for a badge 2 weeks later with a new contract. Fortunately, we were small enough that all of those requests came to one person, and she was a genius, and she would just go, oh, no. I pulled yours away 2 weeks ago. So those are always the fun ones. But what about some of the missteps, the bloopers, the horror stories?
A lot of those, like the biggest, most common one that we would always see is it always comes down to software you're using for exercises. One of the big ones was accidentally communicating the exercise material to the wrong person or people. A lot of exercises I've observed or been a part of, you have these sandbox versions of internal tools that you use. Like, for example, it's a rapid call out software that's supposed to get a lot of notifications out to a whole bunch of people all at once. almost everybody's got something like that. This sandbox version had been used multiple times. It doesn't actually send anything out to anybody real. It just mimics the same process. But it does receive updates fairly frequently, and they usually pull in data from production into the sandbox version. But they'll always scrub the personal information, the emails and the phone numbers. Well, one day, apparently, on an update, the phone numbers were scrubbed, but the emails weren't. And we ran an exercise, we issued a rapid notification, and then many people across multiple states suddenly received a notification that we needed to shed load. And thankfully, the sandbox version by default has a big exercise tag on it, so no one should mistake it as a real order. But a lot of phone calls that day saying, hey, what's this about? You guys doing something? So it's always embarrassing when stuff like that happens, but that's something to always watch out for when you're running exercises is to look at your software, double check, make sure you're not sending out any notifications to the wrong place. Always lead with that exercise, exercise, exercise communication.
Always a nice spike in the adrenaline when you get something like that gets out.
Right. Yeah, especially when it's unexpected. With GridEx, at least, everybody knows that something's going on, you know?
Yeah. You say that, but I think it was GridEx 1 when I had it on my computer and I was at DHS. Before I went out to Dulles where I think Laura and everybody were at for the white cell. And my boss walked by and saw one of the media clips playing on my laptop and started to freak out. So, oh, hold on, exercise. And it was one of those, he knew it was going on. It just caught him at the wrong minute. So,
Yep.
always fun. Yeah, the exercise tools are critical or important to understand the limitations. I learned that when I was in the military. I don't know if you guys ever used the Janus software. They made Atari look good. It was like the old Pong video game from the early 80s. And here we are. It's like 2008, 9, somewhere around there. We're doing this big scenario, like have the entire squadron of cavalry squadron rolling down this desert, and then two of the machines seize, and our operations cell is yelling at, why are these two platoons in the wrong spots? And all of a sudden, the whole exercise fell apart. And fortunately, we had a sand table to fall back on, so we kind of planned for, okay, we know this tool enough to know that it's not great. But yeah, I've seen that before, just completely derail everything if you're not prepared for it.
Yeah, we did have one of the other things that's happened before, which, I mean, there's nothing you can do about it, but sometimes reality just cuts in. We did for GridEx 5 back at Eversource, we actually, it's a 2-year buildup for every GridEx. So all that work, we were ready to go on day 1. We were 15 minutes into GridEx 5, and then a real life gas emergency canceled everything. That was it.
Yeah.
So no GridEx 5, just 2 years of work. Just that was it. I tried to reclaim what we could, and I said, you know what, this is just going to become part of refresher training for the operators. I'm gonna run a smaller version of the scenario on everybody, and so we recouped some of that effort, but a little frustrating when the real world steps in and says, no, we have other plans.
Yeah. We had a similar one at one of my clients last winter. We were getting ready to do an exercise, and then they had a real world that scary how close it was to the scenario we'd put together. So they did that instead, and then revisited that
right
a couple of weeks later. Fortunately, it wasn't the first one, so they kind of had an idea what to do. But
hey, that means you're ready for it.
Yeah, they'd gone through the lessons learned to implement it. This was supposed to be our level up version. So, speaking of lessons learned, how do you make sure you capture those? I know every exercise I've been on, by the time you get to lessons learned, everybody just wants to get out of there.
Yeah. That is very much, I mean, when you're talking about the gold that you're trying to mine from exercises, it's always the lessons learned, the action items. Follow-up is easily the most important part of the process because the exercise is pretty much worthless if you can't get something that you're learning from it. It's the whole point. And that's been one of those things that I say this speaking as a person who just did local simulator exercises and as the now GridEx Program Manager. It's something we've been struggling with for years and years and years. I think everyone who's been involved in exercise design and development is familiar with that struggle of trying to get good feedback. Um, One thing we've learned at E-ISAC is that if we do ask folks for feedback on how we're doing on exercise coordination, we tend to get really good feedback, and we've continued to make improvements to the exercise design and development over time. It's getting the feedback on the operational stuff, to be able to say, hey, what are those concrete lessons learned? What are some things we could pass along to the rest of the industry? That's a little harder to gather, especially from our standpoint. I know we're connected to NERC. E-ISAC is a very non-compliance, non-enforcement entity. We stay very walled off from that part of NERC, but we still understand that's, when we say, hey, can you tell us some of your lessons learned or some of your action items you're pursuing so we can kind of pass that along to the wider industry, sometimes folks are a little hesitant to do so. But some of the best practices, I mean, when you talk about that, we are trying to answer it this year by moving towards a greater focus in that end of the exercise to collecting that feedback and giving planners a little more opportunity to collect feedback from their players as well. Because it's not just about us trying to get our good after action reporting done. We want to make sure that everyone else is getting the opportunity to really gather that feedback that's important to them. So
I'd say some of the best ones I've seen are where they actually spend as much time planning the lessons learned as they do kind of the other injects or the evolutions, and then hand it over to a project manager. That was one of the things when I was at Grant that kind of confused me at first when I was in the after action reviews. I'm like, why is the project manager running this? And then Julie took it over and put together the project plan for the implementation, and we had everything on track within a couple months. It was like, now it makes sense. It's not just going to go into a binder on a shelf somewhere or into the ethereal hard drive somewhere, and maybe we'll look at it 10 years later when we have another incident.
It's a really difficult process because it depends on the exercise you're running and it depends on the format. But that feedback collection process, you don't want to be the person just handing them a little one-pager feedback form and that's like on a scale of 1 to 5 and that's it. If you want to get someone to actually write out some feedback, some actual issues they encountered during the exercise, where are some places where we ran into bottlenecks, et cetera, et cetera. Ask those real questions. Don't just, hey, on a scale of 1 to 5.
Yeah, the smaller the team or even the utility level, one of the things that I've seen that really just helps is to walk back through the exercise step by step. Mm-hmm. Here's what the exercise happened. What did you see happen, or what was your perception of what was happening, and try to figure out what deltas there are and why they were there. There's always somebody that thought, oh yeah, this was happening. In reality, that was not what was happening. Kind of feel like you need the narrator in the background. And in actuality, that's not what it.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent point because actually talking to a lot of planners for GridEx and hearing about their success stories from things like this, doing that run back to talk about what happened, even just in the same control room, if you're just talking about operators, one operator on one side of the room may not have been fully aware of what the other operator on the other side of the room was doing during the whole exercise because of the massive chaos that usually comes with large-scale attacks in something like GridEx. So one person's running their area, one person's running their area, and one might not even be aware, oh, wait, we had a physical attack on this substation as well. You're like, oh, yeah, I ran through that. And it could also be brought into other business areas. I heard from one planner who was saying that they close out their GridEx every year with a very large, like multi-hour breakdown of the entirety of the live play exercise so that folks in ops know what folks in public relations were doing, so that folks in HR, they have HR involved in their exercise, and they can find out what folks were doing in physical security and cybersecurity. Everyone can see every aspect of the exercise summarized for them at the end, so they're aware that it's not just their little bubble that's responding to all this stuff, but it's kind of everybody working together throughout the organization. So I thought that was really interesting.
Another one we did was separated out. We took the senior leadership out of one of the lessons learned, and that really yielded one that was something our CEO really needed to hear because we had an actual incident. He went into the control room to offer support. The feedback from the operators was, "Yeah, we had Dad looking over our shoulder," but they would never have said that if he was in the room. But he was glad to hear that. Oh, okay, then now I know. I'll work through their boss, and if he says, "Come on in," I'll wait for the invitation. So a lot of different ways to get that. Switching gears a little bit, let's pretend like everybody listening here has never heard of GridEx. Can you tell me a little bit about it? What is it? What goes into it?
Sure. Yeah. Well, GridEx is my baby. GridEx is North America's largest grid security exercise. It is a 2-day live exercise that we hold every 2 years, as I mentioned. We are primarily focused on energy asset owners and operators, so that's predominantly electricity, although we do have gas playing a large part in most of these exercises now as well. But that said, we have expanded over the last several exercises to include interdependent critical infrastructure sectors, as well as government and law enforcement agencies. The end goal of the GridEx program is to exercise the resilience of the North American electricity system in the face of a coordinated cyber and physical attack from a nation state adversary or similar. Sometimes there's an intermingling of, we might do domestic violent extremists supported by nation state funding, something like that. But we're basically putting you in the worst case scenario for physical and cyber attack. When we talk about kind of the benefits of GridEx and like why you would want to participate, one of the big reasons is just that everyone's there, right? It's that one big exercise that happens every 2 years, and it enables you to make those connections between organizations as you run a drill that you know everybody else is also participating in. Everyone does their own local exercises, and obviously they should continue to do so. But what you get from GridEx that's unique is that now you have gas industry, comms industry, we're bringing in water and wastewater this year as well, and you have government agencies, state and local law enforcement, all that stuff. And you can connect with them. You can reach out to them. You can coordinate this exercise with them all and then practice a lot of those communications that you don't usually get to practice in your local exercises. So that's the big draw for GridEx. I hope that was a good summary there.
No, I think every time I hear about it, I learn more. Even having been through sitting in the white cell for GridEx 1 and then my utility observing, I think, GridEx 5 when I was there. But for those who have been around and been through 1 through 6, what's new? What's coming up this year they should be prepared for? Obviously, without spilling too much of the details. But
no, of course. Yeah, I don't want to give spoilers, but there's a lot I can still talk about. I mean, in general, right? So for new things for GridEx 7, one of the big ones I mentioned was involving water and wastewater as a new interdependent sector. The big one I kind of alluded to before, we normally have 5 moves. We have move 0, which happens kind of the week prior to live play. You have move 1 and 2, which are day 1, moves 3 and 4, which are day 2. With move 4 specifically, we are answering a request that we got from the industry, kind of some feedback we've gotten over the years. They want more focus on recovery. By the end of 2 days of live play, your entire world's been falling down around your ears for most of it. You're never recovered by the end of the second day. You're barely starting recovery. So now we're going to end move 3, move to move 4 with a week time jump into the future. And we're shifting to more of a tabletop style discussion for that move 4, so that instead of running through that live play, now you're looking back and going, okay, what did we accomplish in moves 1 through 3? How did we respond to that? Kind of like you were talking about with the doing the recap. We're kind of working that into the exercise itself. And then you can look at what did we do in that week of recovery after the attacks? What are the challenges we're currently facing? And how are we going to address them moving into the future? Along with kind of asking those questions as part of the exercise, hey, if this happened, what would we do to make sure it didn't happen again in the future, or at least that we'd be more prepared for it if it happened again in the future. And then you have the opportunity to look at that and go, okay, if that's our answer to this in the aftermath of a simulated attack, do we want to carry that forward into reality? Why aren't we doing that now? So we're trying to bring kind of that feedback collection process into the exercise itself. I imagine during that move forward, everybody's evaluators are going to be scribbling furiously, collecting all that information that they go through. And that's exactly what we want. So that's a big draw, I think, for GridEx 7 is this new shift towards not only recovery, but making that contemplation of what we can do better part of the exercise itself.
I love that, because otherwise it seems like by the end of day two, you're just get it done, get out of there, and really bringing in that reality to it. Of it's been a week instead of just the magic. I still call it the FEMA NLE11. Poof, it's all back. There's no magic in here. It's how it actually would play out, what it would look like. That's a great addition.
And I will add as well, I can say this about the scenario. It's not much of a spoiler here. We are definitely including physical attacks on substations in the scenario. It's one that many people have asked for. It is very much in the news and in the industry's mind right now. So that is going to feature prominently in the scenario itself.
Yeah, plenty to pull from the headlines lately. So
yes.
So within a utility, I know I've been through, again, a couple of these on different sides of it. Who should they bring to the table for GridEx? Who needs to be there? Who'd be nice to have? Who should observe it?
I want to stress first that when we talk about how to engage with GridEx 7, I think a lot of folks within the industry, they wonder, who can play, who's allowed to play, who's allowed to get involved. And I almost guarantee that if you're asking the question, the answer is probably you can. There are very few entities that we would say can't participate. I think the only hard, fast rule is if you are specifically working in a compliance or enforcement role, you probably shouldn't be involved. But other than that, we want everybody to play. So if you want to get involved with GridEx 7, the number one thing you can do is just go to the E-ISAC website. We have a GridEx page. We have a registration link, and you can register as a planner. We also have a publicly available fact sheet available, planner recommendations. We're going to have an FAQ up there pretty soon. So lots of different things you can find out just from looking at our website. But the other thing to note is even if you can't get access through registering on our website, because the one caveat to that is you are required to be an E-ISAC portal member to register through us. It doesn't mean you can't participate in GridEx 7 if you aren't registered on our portal. You can simply just coordinate through the utilities that are. So we were talking a couple weeks ago to the National Governors Association and NERC, which involves state regulators. And they, of course, can get involved. They just might have to go through some of their local utilities to participate instead, coordinate their planning through those utilities. I know every time I hear from utilities asking, hey, how do we connect with our local governments to coordinate this exercise? I tell them, guess what? Your local governments are asking the same question. So reach out, because you will both probably be very happy to find out that you're both planning on participating. You were just looking for how to coordinate. So
it's always great when you can get some of those external support agencies in the door. One of the things that we always did at Grant was had a standing offer to anybody with a badge. You want a tour? Give us a call. We'll walk you through. We brought the 911 dispatchers in as much as we could, or we could bring them in. The county emergency management, we brought them in. It helped that the county emergency management was under the sheriff's department, under the chief deputy whose wife worked on our second floor. So he had an extra vested interest in making sure that our headquarters building was well secured. But yeah, it's so many synergies you find there and opportunities bringing those folks in.
Yeah, very much so. And I think that when it comes down to it, if you're interested in getting involved, just reach out to either the local utilities, or if you are a local utility yourself, then go to our website. One thing I would highly recommend folks to do is coordinate with your reliability coordinator. We actually have every reliability coordinator represented on our RC planning team for GridEx 7. So literally every RC has someone directly involved in development of the entire GridEx 7 scenario. So that means they're all participating. That means they're all going to be involved in some way. Usually when you link up with your RC and start trying to coordinate your GridEx 7 planning through them, that will automatically connect you to a lot of other folks under that RC umbrella. So if anybody was looking for a recommendation, that's probably the number one, is just connect with your RC. They'll be able to connect you to a lot more planners.
That's a great tip. I never would have thought of. It kind of gets into my next question of kind of the challenges and barriers. I know the one I always hear and heard it when I was at Grant was, oh, it's just too hard to figure out how to set this up. Or when we always heard, oh, we don't have time for that. How do you work through those? I mean, obviously starting with the RC, I think is a great spot if you're overwhelmed and don't know where to start. But
yeah, it's an excellent point because I do recommend the RCs because they usually have that kind of planning capital to help you coordinate some of those things. They might be able to do a lot of the work for you. But to that point, you're right. We're now on GridEx 7. We've been doing this since 2011, and it started fairly small, and it has grown and grown and grown and grown every 2 years. So if this is your first GridEx and you're walking in and looking around, you're probably going to see this incredibly daunting scope of an exercise where it's involving all these different interdependent sectors, and you might feel, oh man, never mind. I'm not getting into this. It's too big. The great thing about GridEx is that you can engage with it at whatever level you're comfortable with or you're capable of. We highly encourage folks to get in and start small. Our scenario that we hand you is eminently customizable. We actually do not hold you to the script or the measle that we deliver to you. We say, hey, look, whatever's not meeting your local objectives for the exercise, cut it out. If there's something that's missing and you want to add something to GridEx 7 for you that would answer those objectives, do it. We only want our material that we provide you for GridEx 7 to be a support to meeting your own goals, not a cage to kind of limit you. So that's usually something that folks aren't really aware of with GridEx, is that you're not beholden to the scenario that we give you. It's an opportunity to make those connections and to do an emergency response scenario, but you can tailor it to whatever works best for your organization. So some folks get involved and they say, look, I'm going to coordinate with my RC and maybe one other external entity, and that's it. And I'm only going to do 1 day rather than the 2-day exercise. You can do that. You're welcome to. Others might have all the capital they need to do everything, and that's also great. But plenty of folks get involved at a low level first, and then they expand every 2 years as they move to their next one and they get a little more experience. So start small if you need to.
I think that's a great reminder, because I think so many people just they see it, they see the finished product, they hear the stories about the utilities that have been doing it now for 14 years almost, and think that they've got to go in and send crews, roll crews, and do all those things. In reality, we got value even when I was at Grant of just having it up and saying, okay, what would we do in this situation? Not really having a strong plan. Not as much as we could have, but it was valuable to the people who were able to attend.
Yeah, and it really is something I've been repeating throughout the planning process during our webinars and things that we give to folks, is that it's better to have a very effective and small exercise than to have a large, unwieldy, and ineffective one. I have spoken to planners who's literally for GridEx 7, their plan is to have a tabletop exercise that has maybe 25 people in it, and that's it. They're not even doing live play. Again, you can do that. If that's what works best for your organization, that is what you should do. Pretty much every option is on the table.
Love it. So we're about 7 months out from GridEx 7. If you're in the planning process or you're at a utility, what should they be doing right now? Is it too late to start planning for GridEx 7?
That is a great question. It is definitely not too late. I love hearing stories from experienced past planners, and they tell me, oh yeah, for GridEx 6, I was handed the entire project in September, which is 2 months before the actual event. And they said, hey, make this happen. And they did. Obviously not to the level they probably would have wanted to, but you know what? They made it a small exercise. They made it whatever fit their own organization. So it's definitely not too late to get started. You're actually in a great time to get started. We just earlier this month released the full measle, which is that script for the entire scenario. So now is the time that everybody's getting that process moving. They're customizing their own local scenario. They're figuring out exactly what they're going to be doing with their scenario scope. The other thing to note is that we do a series of training webinars and planning meetings. And even if you have missed them, we've done 3 training webinars now so far. Any registered planner has access to all previous recordings of all webinars we've done. You have access to slide decks. So a lot of good information is out there, including our first webinar we gave, which is just a Planner 101, specifically focused at folks who this might be their first GridEx. And it gives you all the groundwork and everything you'd want to know if you were just getting started. So all that stuff's there. Definitely not too late. If I was going to say what should you be doing now, it's, if you haven't done so yet, identify those local objectives, because it always comes back to what are your objectives for the exercise? What are you trying to get out of the exercise? And then use that to frame the scope of your exercise, who's going to get involved, who's going to play, and then what's the scenario going to look like.
Perfect. So I think we're pretty much running out of things to talk about with GridEx for now. There's plenty more to talk about as we get closer, I'm sure. But what advice would you give to anybody who wants to get involved, wants to get their organization going, or anything else about GridEx you want to throw out that we haven't covered?
Yeah, I mean, in the end, it's mainly register as a planner if you haven't yet. That's going to give you access to literally every piece of planning documentation that we've released so far. We've got a scenario narrative. We've got specific guidance for planners on how they can approach that planning process. All the previous recordings for webinars and things like that. We've got more material coming out every month. We have a regular monthly planner newsletter that registered planners also get. So that's the best way to get involved is just register. Again, that's on our E-ISAC website. I would say in the end, the best thing I can tell you is reach out to other organizations as well. If you have neighboring utilities, again, the RC is a very, very good one to go to. That's really going to help get you plugged in. There are so many experienced GridEx planners out there, and almost every single one I talk to is happy to provide advice and recommendations for the best practices that you can use in GridEx 7 planning. So I hope that's helpful for anybody who wants to get involved. And of course, I should throw out, you can also just reach us at our planner team email at gridex@eisac.com. So if you just shoot us an email, if you have any questions about GridEx, you can reach us there.
Perfect. Love to hear that. Thanks for joining, Jesse. Always great to catch up, talk GridEx. Can't wait to see how GridEx 7 rolls out. It's going to be a good one. Thanks for joining.
Thanks so much.
Stay up to date on all the videos we release here at Archer by clicking on the subscribe button. Click on the bell to be notified right away when we release new videos. If you know of a topic or someone you think we should talk to on DirectConnect, please let us know in the comments below.